Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel, and I'm here today with the amazing Stephanie Berez. Now, I hope you're ready to get your marketing geek on, and you know what, even if you're not a marketing person, I think you'll really enjoy the conversation that we're going to have here about brand. Now, until recently, Stephanie worked as a brand strategist and a brand manager for several major consumer brands. And she's recently left to start her own firm called Heart of Why Marketing. We're going to learn all about that in the episode. And I really hope that you have a good chance to listen to Stephanie and, you know, get a chance to know her and think about your own heart of why as you go through the episode and listen to the great insights that Stephanie has to share. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first time we connected and we talked, I felt like I've known Stephanie for a really long time because, first of all, my earlier guest, Scott Boyarsky, says to me after our podcast that I have to meet Stephanie, who is, number one, a shit hot marketer in this area. And number two, he just said, you guys will get along. You say some of the same things. You know, you have some of the same opinions about marketing and about work. So you need to get connected. Then, of course, I reached out to Steph. Steph graciously agreed to speak with me. Yeah, we had a Zoom.
Yeah, because you're my digital friends. You know,
That's right.
We've actually never met in person. It's like this digital connection. And gosh, here we are doing more digital things together.
It's the oddest thing, honestly. How the digital world has changed the way that we now connect with people. And that's a whole topic that I will probably cover at some point. But right now, like, you know, so Steph and I started chatting. Turns out that, you know, it's just such a small world. We both went to Penn also, by the way, there is that.
Yeah.
So we both went to the same school.
The Penn connection. Yeah.
There were so many kind of loose threads out there. It's kind of a miracle that we hadn't met up until this point.
Yeah, especially since we live in the same town. I mean, we probably walked past each other several times and just never knew each other.
I can bike right to your house in like 7 minutes. You're so
I'll take
close.
you up on that. I expect the coffee in 7 minutes.
It'll happen. It will happen. But yeah, we live real close to each other, and I've been here for 10 years and just met Stephanie for the first time 2 weeks ago. So, you know, just the way that human connections work, the way that your social capital works, it never ceases to amaze me, and how your networks just deliver the right kind of people to you, assuming you're connecting with the right kind of people to begin with. So I guess all signs point to good job, Stephanie, good job, Dan, on connecting with the right people up until now.
Yeah, we had a lot of matchmakers along the way. But what I would love to say is that, gosh, the power of connection, that's at the very heart of what marketing is all about. So it's kind of funny how we met through the power of connection. And here we are having a chat about marketing and connecting people to brands. So
that's right. And
not so far-fetched.
That's a killer segue into our topic today, right? Which is basically anything we want to talk about. But we're going to focus in on brand and on marketing in general, certainly on brand and whatever we want to talk about. But we really are going to focus in on that common ground that we have, which is we're both marketers. Now, Steph comes from real CPG, hardcore brand marketing. And, you know, that's way oversimplifying the incredible career that she's had over the past couple of decades. We were just talking before. I was thinking, you know, Steph, I mean, you're a CMO. I'm here talking to somebody who is essentially a CMO who has decided to strike out on her own. You've started your own company. You are a entrepreneur who has started Heart of Why Marketing. And that's what we want to hear about today. The heart of why. We want to talk about brand. We want to talk about purpose, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's really the heart of your business. You know, if you can capture the heartbeat and the essence and the soul. And gosh, you know what? I think what's so exciting to me is that there's such runway for opportunity. And there's such an incredible amount of nurturing that goes into a brand. You know, the difference between a brand and a product is really, really significant because a brand has soul, a brand has personality, a brand is like a person. and
Yep.
has to be cared for and has a heart and has a mind and has a voice and has a personality. Whereas a product just serves a function. And so to me, capturing the essence of branding and to be able to bring something to life is awesome. And honestly, I do it out of love of people. You know, back in the days of Penn, I studied history and psychology, and I had this wake up moment where I discovered the world of marketing my junior year. And it was like one of those moments where like you hear those like sounds of bells in your head and you say, wow, this is the application of people. So, you know, gosh, if you don't like studying and understanding psychology of people, then gosh, marketing is not for you. But if you do, oh boy, is it a great career.
I was at a presentation by Mark Schaefer, and he's written, I've probably mentioned Mark on every single one of my podcasts. I have to stop doing that. But Mark wrote a book called Marketing Rebellion. And he talks about how marketing is basically what do you say? It's where anthropology and psychology and business all meet. I'm probably getting that wrong. I may have to go back and figure out what he said, but it kind of aligns with exactly your experience there. I came to marketing in a very different way. I just sort of fell into it. I was a copywriter at some point in Tokyo because I didn't like my job. So I quit my job and I thought, what can I do? I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I said, okay, I can start a business, strike it rich. And the only thing I really know how to sell is writing. So I made some business cards, said I was a copywriter, and people believed me and started hiring me to be a copywriter. And then I was on this road, and before a couple of years went by, suddenly I'm a marketing consultant. And I just sort of kind of glided into it a little bit later. But I completely agree. It was like, whoa, it was like this kind of
it's those moments.
moment.
And honestly, you know what it starts with? It starts with that self-belief and that grounding into something that you're passionate about, and you're transposing and transporting yourself from having one skill to then really leaning into all of it. And to me, what's fascinating to me is just like humans, we all have individual fingerprints. Brands all have an individual fingerprint on our world. And I think that is a really interesting way of thinking about branding. That's how I like to think about it. And honestly, it's all of the journeys that we have as marketers that help us empathize with consumers that we're looking to work with, help us understand, hey, how did we get here? And where did we go? And without sounding too ethereal, because really it's just grounded in our personal stories and realities. You wouldn't be having this conversation with me today if you didn't listen to that voice and lean into your copywriting days and say, wait, what more can I lean into? It's pretty powerful stuff.
It is. It's the universe speaking to us in any number of ways. I'd love to think that marketers are in tune with the voice of the universe. I mean, that's a nice way to think about us a little bit. But you mentioned a couple of things there that I do want to talk about. Ultimately, where the brands having an individual fingerprint is I think it's a powerful statement. You also talked about, how they're people and they grow, how they're like people, they grow, they've got personalities, they have a journey. And it reminds me that I'd really like to know more about your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the idea, or how you got into these deep relationships with brands, how you learned to understand what brands are, where it brought you, and how you got to Heart of Why?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to think about that journey and how it relates to where we are today, because honestly, what I just love is to build something that helps shape people's lives for good. And that's really what it all started with. And throughout my time, and I've worked on a lot of brands in consumer healthcare and actually in the candy industry, which honestly, I always loved bringing joy and saw that higher order purpose for that, because gosh, the smile on my kid's face when I bring them candy is priceless. So I always think about all of these vast different moments and the different purposes that brands can serve. But for me, I always brought such a passion to my work because I cared. and I cared for the deepest root of it. And for well over, a decade, I always had my marketing credo on the bottom of my email, the tenacity to never quit and forever driving to the heart of why. And I knew that one day when I was ready to take that leap out of corporate and I felt like I collected the diversity of experiences and skills that I needed to have then that self-confidence, because remember, we talked a beat ago about self-confidence and the ability to believe in yourself, to do something, to realize a dream. But I always had the business name, and I always knew that it came back to the heart of why. Because if you can capture the essence of passion and then understand that essence of purpose and then carry that through, whether or not you're doing branding or if you're doing innovation, strategic planning, communications, even down to tactical planning, if you could keep that why focused and put your heart into something, that's where the magic happens, because marketing really is a combination of discipline and passion, because it just doesn't happen on its own. It takes so much sweat equity. The common person that's just walking into a store or shopping, through e-com these days, sees a product, they don't know what goes into it. And that's honestly, it's part of the magic that we do. But I love that purpose. And I remember so vividly, and I hope that some of my old colleagues are going to listen to this podcast and recall this story. I remember sitting in a focus group back room, and we were trying to understand, dig in. I don't even remember what we were trying to dig in for. And I just did those hand symbols. Like I did heart of why, putting the heart above my head with my two hands folded in and reaching up to the sky with why. And we were like using all this language in the background. And I will forever remember that moment. And I remember that, and this is years and years ago, I was like, this is it. This is it. Because no matter whether or not you're talking to a one-on-one, consumer, trying to understand the depths of what they care about and why, or if you're putting a piece of creative out there, or if you're talking about what color you're going to use for your icon and what your personality is, what your tone of voice is, what's your new campaign, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It has to come back to, well, why are you doing it? And then how could you make sure that what you're doing really does connect to that why, which is obviously where all things like consumer research and measurement come in, which is a whole other topic we could talk to. But that is really what has driven my passion. And I just know that I love that work. And so through the years, I felt like, gosh, now is the right time for me to lean into that and take a risk and have some fun and build something. And honestly, I'm learning because I've never founded a business before, which is kind of cool too, Dan?
It's very cool. And congratulations on taking that step, because I think you're going to be fantastic at it, by the way. But
thank you.
I mean, what's interesting here is you're talking about why, finding the why, and talking about purpose. What's the difference between those two things?
So for me, finding the why is what helps you get to your answer for your purpose. People oftentimes confuse missions and visions versus purpose. The purpose is really the highest order reason that you're there, that your brand stands for something. Like what is it that you do, like at the highest order? For me, for the company that I am building, obviously my mission is to help people, find what makes their brand different and connect to the heart of their consumers, and honoring why your brand exists. Like that's a mission. And obviously the things that I'm doing, the promises that I have is to help them create a pathway towards sustainable success and like adding value. Like those are the promises that I have. But really my highest order purpose is to help you unleash your potential. That's my purpose. My purpose is not to take credit for anything. My purpose is not to, adding value is not a purpose, but actually saying, I'm going to help empower you and your team so that you can unleash the potential that sits within each of you. Because honestly, you know what, from my perspective, there are so many barriers, time or skill or money or creativity or just the bandwidth that we have. So to me, that's that purpose. And then that's really what gets me going. And that's my fulfillment. And that's, when I take a step back and I say, why does this business exist? Why does this exist? It's to help others unleash their potential. So the purpose is really answering the question, why do you exist? What's your take on it?
I've been thinking about this, and I have to cheat a little bit because I had a conversation recently with my friend Andrew Ramirez about this exact question. Well, in a different way. It's interesting how now speaking with you, we're talking marketing and getting that same professional vibe that, okay, I get where you're going with helping companies, clients, people draw out the purpose for what they do and the purpose for their overarching reason, I suppose, to be doing what they're doing. I still have to admit that sometimes I think it overlaps with the why, like purpose and why are kind of, I don't know, like a continuum perhaps. But I think maybe why can change a lot, but purpose can't necessarily change, or it won't change as readily.
Well, I think that the why and the purpose are absolutely interrelated in the way in which I've built out this framework. When you start to answer the depths of the questions, when you ask why and then why again and why again, when you ask why enough times, you get to your highest order purpose. So the first, it might be answered in 3 whys, or you might need to get to 10 whys deep in order to really get to the heart of why. And so to me, that's the difference between just a general why and the heart of why, because the heart of why is your true purpose. You might have a lot of different whys along the way of the things that you're going to do, but when you get to the true heart of it, that's at the core what your brand stands for. Now, brands can evolve just like humans can evolve, but humans don't do 180s, and brands typically don't do 180s either, unless you have like $50 million to spend and to do a whole redesign and really, really shift it. But honestly, typically brands don't necessarily fully depart, but they evolve because the culture and the people around us are evolving and your innovation is evolving, and you can move. But honestly, without having a codified purpose and without having all the things that make your brand, from personality to all the foundational moments and your strategies, you have to have that, because if you don't, honestly, I know few brands that have tenure of lead marketers for north of 3 years.
Yep.
Usually brands are changing hands. And if you don't have that codified, you don't have that consistency. And then, not for nothing, but how many chefs do we have in the kitchen when we work as marketers, between all of the agencies that you can't even count on one hand, and then all of the people cross-functionally that work on it with obviously different innovation people versus base brand folks. So if you internally and through your external partners don't have all that codified, how do we expect consistency in how we go to market and interact with consumers?
It's an anchor, right? Or the cornerstone, I suppose, that keeps the brand on a firm purpose and a firm place.
And honestly, like in my framework, I think of it as the heart, and it's just that heartbeat, because you are who you are. But I feel like there's so much opportunity, because you ever experience something where you see an ad and who it's from before you even see the branding?
So that is a great point there. I want to hold that for a second, because I was just about to ask you, we're talking about brands, but maybe what we really should do is kind of say, like, back up a little bit and you say, okay, what is a brand really? Like, marketers throw this around a lot. And sometimes we're all kind of talking about the same thing, but it's not always exactly the same thing when you talk about brand. I mean, it's a very broad area, but what we're talking about here when we talk about brand is, I think, what you were just about to get to. When you see that commercial, when you see something, what is that gut punch you get? What is that feeling? So to me, like, at its most simple way of kind of describing it, brand is that gut feeling, that gut reaction, that kind of definition of what you're seeing, like what stands behind the product. What is the, all rolled up into one. What do you feel in your gut, when you see that commercial? It's kind of meta way of thinking about it.
Gosh, you know what? I think there's so many examples and definitions of brands, and I think that's a very powerful one. And I also feel like, going back to the classical days of branding, back in the day, we put our brands on there as a trusted mark. It was a brand mark, and it was there to show that you could trust this product. And honestly, I like to think of brands as a promise that as a brand, we stand for something. We stand behind our product. There's trust, and we have a personality. Now, notice I'm not saying what kind of personality you have, because there's all different kinds of personalities. But I really think that that's what brand comes down to, because then there's branding where you activate against it. Yeah. But a brand stands for a promise, and you deliver upon that promise, and you activate on that promise, because you're not just a functional widget. And that to me is the difference between brand and product. There are products out there that are not branded, that just do something, like the tap water that comes out of your faucet. That's not a brand. That's
most commodities.
Product. That's your water. Yeah, exactly.
Become commodities. Yeah,
exactly. But you know what? I think that the powerful thing, Dan, is that there's certain, sectors and people that need to start thinking of themselves as brand. I'm a brand. You're a brand.
Yeah.
People are brands, and we market ourselves, whether or not it's on LinkedIn or social media. We're all our powerful brands. But I also think that there's a lot that, we can learn from each other in certain disciplines and bring the power of branding to build trust, not just for brands that you can go into the store and buy, but also brands in terms of services or universities or financial services or, doctors' offices. They're all brands. So I think they have a promise and they deliver upon it and activate against it. And gosh, what would our world look like if we were able to all think about those through the lens of what purpose am I serving?
Well, so which brands do it well? I mean, we were just about to get into that, I think, when we started mentioning commercials.
Well, I threw a question to you. I was curious to you. What comes to mind when you think about, the brands that, gosh, who they are before they even say it?
Sure. We're so exposed to media, and certainly we, I think, are taking a hyper view of this, because when marketers look at a brand activation, when you look at whether it's an advertisement or a thought leadership story, or an event booth or an outdoor display or something. I mean, whenever we look at one of these things, we're always going, okay, how's that tying the brand in, and what's the thread, and gosh, I mean, are all the components there, and does that splash of green tell me about the loyalty that do I sense the real purpose when I see those 3 or 4 different squiggly lines? We go into this kind of into our head, right? I think, as marketers. Right. So maybe we're not the best people. We overanalyze. But maybe, but I think it's a great question, because sometimes it's good to step outside and look at who's doing it well. For sure. I mean, when you see let's just take it easier with kind of these B2C, big brands that you'll see on, either on the web or on TV or something, where who it is before you actually know who it is. And you always know, I think you always know a Target ad before, it's Target before Target comes on, right? You kind of get that from the space, from the use of space, and from the kind of crispy kind of imagery that's out there, and from this kind of, I don't know, very almost, it feels like there's a positivity coming off of the screen. Put it all together, and you're like, okay, the Reds are coming in now, it's going to be Target, right?
Right,
but,
right.
It's
the music, it's everything. It's everything. They really, because there's brand identity, and that brand identity is carried forward, whether or not you're seeing a social ad or commercial on TV, it doesn't matter, even down to the stores. I think that, the fact that they redid their stores with their branding, I think that they have done a really great job at staying consistent in their identity.
Yeah. And it's interesting how even they now have brands that they now sell, that they now own and control within the Target universe, right?
Oh, a ton of brands. I mean, they honestly, I think half my daughter's wardrobe is Cat and Jack because it's a high quality, great, attainable price point, and I know they stand by it. And you know what? They're on trend with the colors and the fabrics of what a nearly 7-year-old is looking for. So, everything from that to, some of the other things that they do in the personal care space. I just think that they really obviously care about branding on a different level. And I think it shows, and that's what attracts consumers to their stores.
Well, what would be one that you think you'd like to call out?
I'd say that one of the most poignant examples, and it's so funny because this has gone on for so long, is the Old Spice commercials. I feel like I know that it's Old Spice, and talk about a brand that reinvented itself, huh? Like they're not your grandfather's Old Spice. And I just think that, the quirky, the kind of humor, the tone that they set, but just even the production quality and their approach to the cinematography and their ads are all just done through the lens of what that brand is all about. So I just think that that's another example that I really appreciate. Taking it into another kind of category, Amex is Amex. I know when something is coming from Amex, and they continue to build that trust. And honestly, I think that one of the best things that they did was the concept of Small Business Saturday, and the support that they have for small businesses, I think was a really interesting angle for them to play up when they were the more expensive card for businesses to have to process. They actually leaned into this whole small business thing. And I just think that Amex has consistency in branding, even though they have a lot of products. And I think that that's hard to do. And that can only be done if you have people taking a step back and planning out strategy, and then having this playbook that is available for campaign governance. There's not enough governance in the way in which a lot of other brands are managed. So kudos to Amex.
It's also their story. They have to have the right story behind everything that they do, and it has to be the same story behind everything they do, and you have to feel like it is the same voice telling you that story, so that builds the trust. You have the authenticity of the brand that's portrayed by this, whether it's a wise teacher. Like we talk about archetypes all the time. Is it a wise teacher? Is it a sage? Is it a coach? Is it whatever? There's many of those, and I think that as an element of some of the brands that do it so well, who it is before who they are. It's because they weave that in. So I think so skillfully ahead of time. I was thinking in the B2B space. Look at this one. So I'm going to show Stephanie something on the screen here, and you may not get it right away, but I'm pretty sure you could probably know. Like, it's just a notebook with one word on it, and the word is think. The word is think, and it's a B2B company, right? As soon as I saw this notebook, I knew who it was, and of course it's IBM. IBM has this solid think, be smarter kind of campaigns that have been going on now for decades, and it'd be hard pressed to find, I think, another B2B brand that does it better than IBM.
It's true. But that comes back to what you were saying. They're living into their promise of what they're offering. And that's the very trust that you're putting into it.
Yeah.
And then the reflection it has on you if you choose to procure their products. So
and the promise is when the campaign really reflects the promise is I think when they're super successful, and they can go on for ages and ages and ages.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that that's so important. Marketing went through, and I think it's still in this phase, but marketers have gone through this whole power of storytelling and connect emotionally. While I absolutely believe in the power of story and emotion, you have to do so with keeping your purpose in mind and with delivering upon your promise. If it's just storytelling to get that oohs and ahs, then you're not going to connect back to your brand. And therefore, the recall is not going to be there. And therefore, what action are you looking for the consumer to take? You want to be able to obviously either build equity in your brand or drive awareness and trial. And if you're not actually translating that cultivation of this beautiful story into driving whatever you need on that marketing funnel, then you're really wasting your marketing dollars. And, it was a little painful to see some of the ads that came out at times. While I appreciated the cultural context of some of these, COVID-19 related ads that came on that were in this together, I cringed at some of them because I felt like, although that's wonderful, that's something to be doing in an organic post, and that's something to be doing in a supportive way on your website. But if you're going to take your marketing dollars, you need to keep in mind why and what am I doing with this? And obviously, if you are a manufacturer of something related to COVID-19, then
Masks,
okay, fine, I understand
PPE,
you have a purpose, right? Exactly. If you're masks, yeah, exactly. But you know what? Like if you're not directly into it, and listen, I'm not one to name names, so we're not going to talk about anything that I saw. But it made me cringe because I was like, what's the ROI going to look like when you do your marketing mix? And how is this going to throw back onto your brand? And while you may be viewing this and saying oohs and ahs, is it really doing what you need to do? Is it moving the needle? Is it delivering that return for your business and setting you up for success long term?
Well, there are certain things that what we're really talking about here is the brand being authentic, and do they have standing to make a statement or to do something at this particular time. And then there's all these different vagaries of well, how long should they be waiting? And if they wait too long, then they certainly look like they're just playing catch up and just posing. But there are some great videos out there available to anybody who wants to do a quick search for all these messages are exactly the same videos of stringing together a lot of those COVID-19. We're in this together with the vast landscapes, the solitary person, the hero slow-mo move, the great grand music playing in the background, the solid text on the kind of on the sparse screen, giving these very important messages and hitting you again and again with them. Whoever did it first, great. Everybody else, I think, is now just an also ran, assuming the first one had standing to do so. It's interesting how we now are in a society or in a place where I think certainly the consumer and the buyer is in 100% control of everything, and it is the buyers are the consumers are now the marketers in a way. So their reaction to these missteps by internal and corporate marketers or by agencies can be a death knell in a hurry. And we're going to see some, I think we're going to see some bloodbaths after this whole period of time of uncertainty is over, where some brands are going to be paying the price for either really straying very, very far out of their lines and taking advantage or being perceived to have taken advantage of the consumers in this time, or where they didn't say anything and they just decided to hide and hope it passed by when they should have probably said something. I think there's a whole spectrum of the way that certain brands could have and should have reacted. But the consumers will vote with their wallets. The B2B companies will vote with their procurement people. And there's going to be a reckoning, I imagine, over the next several years. It's probably,
and honestly, you said silence. marketers should know better, because the number one thing when we do research is we listen for the silence. We listen for what people are not saying. Mm-hmm. If you're really good at attuned to connecting dots and listening to research, so the world does listen to the silence. And that's a really powerful thing to consider. And to me, this all comes back to brand values. And if your brand has values and you're living your values, then you can continue to live them through the lens of today's culture. But if you're going to wake up right now and say all of a sudden, I'm going to have values, you know what, it might feel a little inauthentic, because this is, it's hard to feel woke in this world right now and then not be beat up about it. So to me, it's never too late to say and put forth what is your brand going to stand for, and then how do you back it? If you say that you stand for transparency, well, then you better publish your quality data, and you better tell people when there's an issue, or you better appreciate that open dialogue on, your social pages, and not, curate it. And you better live into that value, because values are not something to obviously go on a piece of paper. They're meant to be actioned off of. And if you do that, then you have permission to join other conversations and join into culture as it evolves. And then therefore your brand will evolve too, and not look stale.
Well, people have to believe that you stand for what you say you stand for. So you have to earn their trust. And, this is the communications element is the brand communications element is critical here. We have to build enough trust and earn your license to operate in any environment. Right now, I think we're in hyperspeed, where there's so many societal changes, and the idea of societal changes interplaying with brands is relatively new, and has caught so many people and so many brands off guard. But not all of them. And some brands are absolutely killing it, both from a values point of view, because they've already had the values in place and they're on firm ground when they pivot and say, you know what, here's what we're going to do. Or brands who have decades and decades of trust, where they can afford to kind of tell or speak with their customers and say, well, maybe we've been doing it a little wrong, or maybe we want to change a little bit. Will you allow us to do that? And they've already earned that. But there's so many brands that I think don't do it well. And I'm not going to name names here either. But
let's name a positive example. Dan, like one of my favorite ones, honestly, of all times, is what Always did with their Like a Girl. And they fielded a study, and they learned with data that a girl's confidence drops significantly as she goes through puberty. And they did that whole, it was a 2-minute, case studies have been done on this. But I think that that's a brand that's been around forever, that was selling into some of, obviously, for decades, the old tropes of, what it was like when a woman had her period. And they grabbed that and shaped culture. So the very notion of the fact that, marketers could be caught a little flat-footed as culture is shifting around them right now is almost mind-boggling on a certain level, because I would say as marketers, it's our job to shape culture. And that's a lot of responsibility. And what can we do to shape culture in a positive way? What could we do when, faced with challenges? What do we stand for? And that's what it all comes back to, this essence of branding. And, marketers have to have grit. I think I was mentioning this to you earlier. My favorite psychologist actually is also out of Penn. She's out of Penn, and Angela Duckworth. Gosh, if you haven't read that book, read it. Grit, amazing. And she's given some amazing talks on the power of grit, because it's about perseverance and it's about passion. And it's not that you were born with something. It's about the fact that you work hard for it and you focus on what you can control. So while we can't control the world around us, we can help shape it, and we can never control the uncontrollables. But we're very rarely in a position where everything is out of our control. So what can we affect? And then as marketers, what are our strategies and where do we invest, right? How do we segment our markets, and what consumers, or what, in B2B relationships, who do we want to target to do business with? And what choices are we making? And those choices define us because, those are our actions.
I love this idea of grit and perseverance and passion. It humanizes the struggle that brands have a lot more. But it also paints a very good picture of the challenge, because, old days, you have a brand that you want to get into people's mindset. You think of the traditional funnel, get them into the awareness phase. Well, let's just throw a whole hell of a lot of money out there, right? And run like 4 or 5 different campaigns at the same time. And yeah, we'll sink in, right? That's absolutely obsolete now and completely, ineffective for the most part. I mean, money always does help when you really want exposure, if that's your goal. But it's in the time of, of shifting control, which probably began with the internet, but really accelerated as e-commerce grew and as social media really, really took off, where the control has shifted into the hands of the consumer, right? You got to work for it more. You really have to work for it more. And you have to work harder and harder with less and less money, for the most part, to win hearts and minds one at a time. The power of each of those consumers to speak to one another is amplified to the point of, what network television used to be. One consumer.
Yes, I think that's it's a great point, because it's so fragmented, right?
It's crazy, right?
And it's so crazy.
And anything can kill it. Anything can kill all those efforts. That's why that's why I really like this idea of grit. Just it is a slog. It is perseverance,
yes,
passion, and it's hard to see that on the surface of many marketing efforts, and certainly marketing and even communications efforts, where the brand you're representing doesn't necessarily lend itself to those kinds of efforts. It looks like you're trying too hard, maybe. But the marketer and the team and the strategist, the creatives, really need to understand that your target, whoever your target is, first of all, you have to know that target much more intimately than you would have known targets in the past.
Sure.
But that target is going to take a while to win.
And I think that's such an important thing, because people try and be all things to all people, and that never works. So why do you think it's going to work with branding? It doesn't work. What you just said just triggered, I want to throw some major props and credit to all of the partners that it takes for a marketer to bring a brand to life, notably the R&D and the science and technology partners. Because I'll tell you, in my time, the opportunity that we had to bring both the strategy, the marketers, the strategists, the marketers, and the ad folks together in one room with our R&D partners, that's when we've cracked the code. Because if you really want to understand what's in a brand DNA, find out how the product works. What does it do to differentiate itself? What's that science and technology behind it? And then how do we add that lens of communications to it? Honestly, my favorite example, and while I never worked on the brand, it was part of a company that I was at for a beat. I love that Mott's applesauce puts hand-picked goodness on its product.
Great. Yeah.
You ever thought of that? Because all apples are really handpicked for the most part. They activated against a category truth, and they own it. And so, you say handpicked goodness, I think Mott's, and that's Mott's applesauce. And they built and nurtured that kind of, that to me, and I love this phrase of find your undeniability.
Mm.
Like that is undeniably Mott's if I say handpicked goodness. In my mind, we are huge applesauce lovers, by the way. In the Berez household, you dip everything in applesauce. It's just almost wackadoo, if you ask me. I married into the applesauce gurus. But in the seasons where we're not making our own, Mott's it is. And it's powerful.
The undeniability effect there. I like that you said that. What is the undeniability of a brand? Is that the same thing as a USP, or is it the same thing as a differentiator? I don't think so. I think it's deeper than that. I feel like it's, well, the Mott's example is a great example, but is it more than that? Is it a personality trait? Is it the values all put together? Is it all of the above? I don't know. Now you're giving me something to think about.
It's any and all.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think, if you think about it, what makes your brand undeniably if you can find that undeniability in your brand, that's what sets it apart. Yes, it's uniqueness, but everything needs to be unique, whether or not it's your purpose or all aspects of your branding, or if it's the partnerships you choose to take, or gosh, you found, I remember when Mio launched those droplets that you added to your water, right? The Mio brand, that was one of, Nielsen lauded that as one of the biggest innovations in that year or years. I think they did it for 2 years because it was just a rock star. And you know what? They found their undeniability. That was just so undeniably unique, and they had the branding right, and the shape of the bottle was even in a droplet, and they just had all of the elements of the branding come together, and they activated against it. And that, to me, is really exciting, right? When you can see somebody really take things to the next level. But at the end of the day, people are connected to it because that's different, and it has a branding, right? It's branding at the heart of it.
I think that undeniability is the secret sauce that makes the connection possible. If we can say that, because why else would you choose a brand to be your go-to, or to be your the one that you decide to spend your hard-earned money on, or the one you decide to spend time with, or whatever? There has to be an undeniable quality about that brand. I read a while ago, and shame on me for forgetting who the authors of this particular piece were, but there's a social life of brands. And when I say a social life of brands, I don't mean that brands go out and have a beer with each other. I mean that a brand has a life cycle, much like a person, right? They're created, they're born, they go through a childhood and an adolescence, right? Then they reach their maturity. And so for some brands, that maturity goes on it could be hundreds of years, right? It could be them. There are some brands out there.
The best of them, for sure.
There's some, especially some massive B2B companies that have been around for, GE. That's had a social life that is still in adulthood and has been for decades and decades and decades. IBM, same thing. But they can also be victim of, the foibles of humanity, hubris and, the cockiness and making terrible mistakes, or, doing something evil, God forbid. But brands, have this human quality about them, and they can thrive, or they can perish based on how human they are or aren't. And, every human being has this undeniability about them, for sure. So it makes sense that a brand should. And if a brand doesn't, or if a brand can't figure out what that undeniability is, they're just going to languish, I think.
Yes, I completely agree. And honestly, if a brand doesn't stay curious and a brand doesn't stay in learning mode, then they're going to just diminish in terms of their perception of modernity and approachability through today's lens for today's consumer. And, obviously any marketer knows the classic example of Kodak. They had their blinders up, and, they didn't think they needed that digital camera. Now, who cares about the digital camera? We all have a walking camera in our pocket in our cell phone. But the fact is that if you see guardrails as a disabler to innovation, then we're looking at guardrails in the wrong way. I always view guardrails as an enabler of creativity. One that if you think about how do you get out of your current ways of thinking and stretch and then challenge yourself through obviously introducing a lot of unique vantage points to try and say, how do we stretch? And that's honestly the problem with some of the big companies, which is why there's so many disruptors. Once companies have hard assets, have production lines, have all these internal capabilities and layers, it's very difficult to then steer that boat in a different direction. But I think that in today's world, if you're a brand and you're getting bigger, you got to figure out how do you build in that nimbleness and how do you build in the ways to stay innovative, not just in function, but also in form.
Well, I hate to do this. This has been, we can keep going about this particular, anything that we've been talking about, but I think we need to wind this down a little bit. And which means, of course, since there's so much more to talk about, it means I got to have you on again.
It'd be a pleasure. This is fun.
It's great. Before we go, what would you like to leave the listeners with? Like, what are, as somebody who has worked with some incredible brands from Trojans to Trident, you've really hit a broad swath of the kinds of things that affect people's lives, that people use to make their lives more fun or certainly better in many ways. But the fact is that you've worked with brands that really deliver on the promise of, connection. From your experience and from what you want to do with Heart of Why, what would you like people to leave with here, and where can they find you if they want to know more?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks. And honestly, stay curious, stay disciplined, stay networked. I mean, gosh, this conversation would never have happened if we didn't start talking. Always be reading something. I always have a fact and a fiction going. I think that there's always something to be learning both from our extended world and the power of creativity that is not always grounded in reality. But then also, having a nonfiction that you're sifting through is wonderful. Mm-hmm. I would also say that, gosh, at the end of the day, wouldn't it be great if we can just all help each other? And I have to say that from a humanity perspective, as I'm in the very early stages, just a little over 2 months into this journey, founding this new business, I have definite appreciation for the relationships and the strength of connection that I felt with people, as folks are always so willing to hop on the phone. And my favorite question that I've asked folks is, what would you tell yourself if you could go back in time while you were starting something new, or when you were founding that business, or whatever, because everybody's perspective is different. And I just want to shout out to a big thank you to everybody that's helped me along the way and sharing some advice. And you did so too. So thank you to my friend Dan here for having me.
Amy.
True to fashion here, I'm in the midst of building the website. So once I go live, you'll be able to see it at heartofwhymarketing.com. But in the meantime, if you want to reach out to me, it's just Stephanie at heartofwhymarketing.com.
Perfect. And Stephanie, it has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really looking forward to having you on again. And until next time, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks again for listening.